Greetings, everyone. Hello. And welcome. Thank you for joining us for the first post-pandemic or post-isolation, I've heard it say. The pandemic is apparently still amidst us, but the isolation period ended, and we are now gathering again face-to-face for the first time since we had to stop here at Christ Lutheran for the Kegley lecture series. So for that, I'm extremely grateful, and I thank you all for being here to help us get this started. A lot of friends and family here tonight, so I'll probably be saying hi as I go. I'm Stephen Warren, and I'm on the board of directors for the Historical Society of Western Virginia. It's my second tour of duty, and when I was not watching myself, they said, we need someone to head up that Kegley lecture series. And honestly, that for the first time, I was like glad I wasn't paying attention, because this is a real plum assignment. If anyone, and I know a lot of you did know George Kegley, what a remarkable man. And he did these lectures for we don't even know how many years, but we are so grateful for his service to the Historical Society in Roanoke and the surrounding region in general. But just with our society alone, his impact was enormous. And beyond that, it's continuing to be known and felt. And so when they said, would you be interested in this? I said, absolutely. It would be a fantastic way to honor our friend George. And the only problem was we had about 3 weeks to get the first one off the ground, because this was like early February. And so we wanted to have a February presentation. And so, you know, Providence and however you want to look at things, the universe, God, was in our favor. And so we had a great first speaker that Trish White-Boyd came and talked to us about a lot about what you're going to hear tonight about the city cemetery, but other issues related to urban renewal. And she spoke at the Link Museum's auditorium downtown. And so this being the first time back for Christ Lutheran, I was able to find a dear friend, Alison Blanton, who had an opening in her schedule, and she just happened to say yes, but she said, only if I can bring my friend Ann Stewart Beckett. And I said, you bet, you bet. Thank you, both. I'll get back to you in a second. So, before I forget, because last time I did forget until we brought her back around, I'm going to bring Ashley Webb, our curator, to the podium, because she has a lot of things to tell you about that are happening at our museum.
Hi everyone, I am Ashley Webb. I am the curator of collections and exhibitions with the History Museum. And if you didn't grab one of these little sheets on your way in, definitely grab one on the way out. We have a lot coming up, a lot going on. First things first, 2 exhibits. We have 2 exhibits going on right now. One is Railroad and the Art of Place, photographs by David Kaler. That is actually going to be extended, and we'll stay up until June 10th now. It used to be May 6th, but we're extending it for some reasons, but personal reasons. And then we also have The Art of Place, which is local landscapes by local artists, and Brett Legoo is our artist in residence for that. And he is actually painting in the museum. So he's painting Tuesdays and Wednesdays, as well as every other Saturday. So definitely stop by and see him in action. He likes to sketch in the mornings and then paint in the afternoons. So be sure to come by and see him. He's going to be there this upcoming Saturday, and then the April 15th is the next Saturday. That will end April 29th, and the exhibit will close May 6th. We also have this weekend, in conjunction with the Art of Place, a photography class. It's rural Art of Place, and so if you have any experience with photographies, cameras, that's great. If you don't, come learn. Rich Davis, our educator and photographer, will be taking a group up to a place near Bent Mountain. I don't really know.
South of Bent Mountain.
Okay, south of Bent Mountain, to photograph some really cool outbuildings there. That is $40 for members and $50 for non-members, and you can sign up online at our website. On May 13th, we are going to be doing a Norfolk and Western Architectural History walking tour that is free to members and $5 for non-members. Again, May 13th, we're meeting at 11 a.m. at the museum. No need to sign up, just show up, and Kelly's leading that tour, so that'll be a fun time, a little jaunt around downtown. On May 18th, we are taking a bus trip to Pharsalia. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. I don't think anything is going out for that yet, but stay tuned for that. That's going to be $95 for members and $110 for non-members. And with that, you'll get to explore the 1814 historic home, the outbuildings, you'll get a box lunch on the grounds, and that also includes your transportation there. So that is a day trip. And then on May 23rd, we do have, or no, not May, April. What's the?
April 23rd.
April 23rd. We do have our next Kegley lecture with, I know I'm forgetting his name.
Ted Carroll.
Ted, thank you. On Ted Carroll on Voices of Catawba. So come see that. That will be here. Again, free for members, $5 for non-members. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen.
Did any of y'all notice something different about Ashley? Just wanted to throw that out there. Those of you who know her have realized that she's been debilitated this past quarter for, shall we say, a snow-related incident. She's without her cast today. As soon as we got in here, she said, "I can't do chairs." I mean, so she was just letting me know right there. She had a doctor's excuse. I want to make a brief pitch, but I'll go as long as it takes to sign everybody up for membership in the Historical Society. The reason it's important is because not only do you get benefits, but it also helps sustain the programs and the services and the work we do in the community and over time. You know, we go way back, but we also hope to be here for a long time. And so one way to support that effort is to become a member. And if you're not, we are already a member. We do have membership packets here, and I'll let the brochure speak for itself, but one of the benefits is the Kegley lecture. And so if you were planning to attend all of the Kegley lectures over the next 12-month period, that membership would practically pay for itself. Just say it. All right? So I just want to put a pitch in for that. And also, want to thank Christ Lutheran for welcoming us back. We've been here for many years, but we weren't sure if the space was going to still be available. There might have been another group slipping in here and taking our spot, but they didn't. They welcomed us back graciously, and they even threw in free use of the projector, which, if you've been to some of our earlier lectures, you know that could have been a struggle because we would have to put our projector on a table back there, and it could be a little rickety. So we're very, very, very grateful. And in a minute, we're going to turn the middle lights out so that we can get a better video of this. And then, let's see, what else do I want to do here? That was pretty much it for my notes. I want to introduce our speakers. And again, you can tell already that there's a familial tone. I've known Alison for, well, Alison and at least known friends of Alison for like 30, 40, 50 years. But I'm just now finding out that I'm good friends with a whole lot of people that Ann Stewart Beckett knows. So we're like, this is the thing about being in Roanoke. If you haven't figured it out already, it's the biggest small town you're ever going to be in. And it's just, there's a sense of connection and friendship that you can't find too many other places. But so I know these people. And first, Alison, I want to tell you a little bit about her. She's a preservation consultant with a graduate degree in architectural history and preservation from the University of Virginia. She has over 30 years of experience in the field of historic preservation. As Senior Preservation Fellow at Hill Studio, Alison provides expertise on cultural and historic projects, including state and federal historic tax credit rehabilitations, National Register nominations, historic resource surveys, design guidelines, preservation plans, and interpretive signage. She is a trustee of the Roanoke Valley Preservation Foundation, and she has served on numerous boards in the Roanoke Valley. In fact, from my view, there is very little being done in the way of preservation here that does not have some connection to Alison. I've been on I've hung out with the train fans, and you know, she's involved with preserving train stations. You hang out with this other group, and you find out she's preserving those things. It's just, you can't go anywhere without finding something that Alison has had a hand in. And I'm just proud, as anything, to brag on you like that. Now, Ann Stewart Beckett has an equally strong background in architectural history. She also has 30 years of experience, and her work includes research, documentation, and evaluation of historic resources throughout the Commonwealth. She graduated from Mary Washington College with a degree in historic preservation, and she went to work right away as a draftsperson with the William and Mary Center for Archaeological Research. She was later promoted to their senior architectural historian position. But in 1996, Ms. Beckett moved to Roanoke, and that's to our gate, to work with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. She served as the architectural historian for the Southwest Virginia Field Office at the Roanoke Regional Preservation Office. She's also connected with local preservation, most notably with the nomination of Roanoke's Mill Mountain Star to the National Register of Historic Places. That was in 1999. She then served as the preservation planner and agent to the Architectural Review Board for the City of Roanoke. And as we were talking beforehand, that means she was employed by the City of Roanoke in the planning department. And I can't remember how many years you were there, but for a bunch of them, 5. And is that lost my 5, 10? And so she currently works as a historic preservation specialist for the federal government. See, I went into social work because I can't do math very well, so that's why it's just numbers to me. Ms. Beckett was also made a trustee to the Roanoke Valley Preservation Foundation after her 20-plus years of service to that group. So without further ado, let me welcome Ann Stewart Beckett and Alison Blanton.
First things first, right? Let me get my glasses. Because after the introduction, you may figure out how old I am. And she said to turn this way on. Here we go. I did it. The hardest part. That's going to be the hardest part. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's a great crowd. It's good to see so many people and so many friendly faces, people I know. And Allison probably just knows everybody here, so half of you. So we're here to talk about the Old Lick Burial Grounds, also Old Lick Color Cemetery. And we're part of a small committee that works on this cemetery through Friends of Old Lick. And Allison's going to tell you a little bit about the Friends of Old Lick Committee before we get started.
Some of you all may know Friends of Old Lick was formed back in 2019, and Ellen and Greg Stick are really the driving forces behind it, but it's a large group of volunteers that Ann will mention, give you all a little more information on them later, but we're part of a subgroup that is working on doing some research to be able to put an interpretive panel there. And so this presentation is, we're not there yet, we don't know all the answers yet, but this is to try to give you all a peek behind the scenes of the type of research that we're doing to try to make sure that when we put that on the sign that we've got it right. So, and I should mention Angie Elliott's here, she's part of our committee, as well as Evie Sloan, and then Ellen Stick, and Ann and I are the ones that are working on the interpretive sign.
Because we have so much experience doing that with other interpretive signs throughout the city. We love doing interpretive signs, but this one is a challenge because there's so much history and we want to get it right. I see Joe Cobb is here, so if there's anything wrong, just don't tell us.
I can't wait to see what else you've discovered.
So we do want to reiterate that this is a work in progress, but it's really been enjoyable. I think we spent probably a few months really working on the. Well, Angie's been doing a lot of the historical research for the interpretive sign. So this is kind of the result of that we put this PowerPoint together. Did it work? I'm very good at everybody. Just so it's on. Fix it. Cookie. Oh, wait, don't go. That's not fair. Okay, so I'm opening with this slide here. Little aerial view of Roanoke. Who here lives in Roanoke? Okay, very good. Who knows where the Old Lick Colored Cemetery is located? Bobby. Gosh, that's almost everybody.
Okay.
That's crazy.
Let's give it a few slides that way.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is just the introduction here, and so of course 581 really impacted the Old Lick Cemetery. So just a little bit of saying that it basically came in. 581 came down to the Orange Avenue cloverleaf about December 1964. Gives you a little bit of introduction. And a lot of this was new to me. I mean, I really had to research it. I didn't know when the 581 came in. And then we're going to just zoom in on, this is the remaining location of the cemetery. And then you can see where the cloverleaf took the other out. But we'll have lots of graphics here. So that's the remaining cemetery location. So basically the Urban Renewal, 581 was coming through about 60 years ago. It started, taking away Gainsborough. So about 60 years ago. So there's many people that have lived it, and their parents lived it. And I was privileged to be at the Gainsborough meeting 2 weeks ago, Wednesday, where they had a panelist of 3 people that lived it. And that was life-changing. I had to change a lot of these slides. Oh my God. Okay, now I understand it completely. I got it. As best as I can as a white person. So, because I'm from Virginia Beach, where there was no urban renewal, so I never dealt with this. So basically, I can go through these pretty quickly. This is showing you where the cemetery is for you that don't know, but I think most of you do. And so, Ellen Sick, who's the creator of the Old Lick, Friends of Old Lick, we reviewed this as a committee. So when she saw this slide, she said, "Yeah, but we've cleaned all this up." So they've been there maybe a couple of years. It's the first Saturday of every month. People go out. Richard is a big proponent of it. He's always there on Saturday, and he's a big guy, so that really helps to haul the trash. But so it's been really cleaned up.
But this will give you an appreciation for how much work they've done.
Mm-hmm. And Angie, you're out there a lot. Do other people know about the volunteer work? You can go there first Saturday.
David Tucker.
Okay, David Tucker. It's a great place to be. I love being there. It's very sacred.
This Saturday, 9:30.
Yeah. That's my closing slide. So, I'll just leave it at that.
Sorry.
That's okay. You can't say it too often.
Yeah. And this is just showing 220, the 581 220 overpass, the connection to it. And then here's the fence line. So this is an important site. So this is where the current cemetery ends.
Oh.
And you've got the on-ramp here coming up to 581 to go north. Yeah.
Are there still all those trees along Orange Avenue there? It
Yeah.
looked like a lot of those have come down. Right?
Well, this.
I mean, not from that side, but the last one you showed, I think, was going west.
Well,
That's
this is.
heading west on.
I think these trees were served, but they're cleaned up. All the ivy and all of this
And all
section has
over
been
ground.
cleaned.
Okay.
Yeah. And I have more of the interior of the.
You come find out this Saturday then.
I walked there before. I mean, a couple of years ago, I think before any of the work was done, when it was a little more overgrown. But
Would that be great if you came back and you could?
I will come this Saturday. Yeah, I will make a point to do. Or excuse me, I'm skiing. Yes, for the ski season.
Okay, we'll see you in May.
Yes, thank you.
So these are some photos we took from the fence line. And this was about a year ago, and Allison was there with us, so we walked all the way across the timber. So here's your fence line. And then, so from left to right, that's the view looking downtown towards Wells Fargo. Then a little bit southwest, we have St. Andrews, and then due west is the Booker T. Washington School. So when we were at the Gainsborough meeting 2 weeks ago, and one of the ladies there said, she was a student at Booker T. Washington, and from that school, she could see the headstones of the cemetery. That might traumatize you too, but, so I thought, I knew I had these photos, so I really wanted to find them and put them in here. So that shows you how much further the cemetery went.
Oh, so,
Yeah.
I mean, how far, it went all the way to the school?
Not quite.
Okay.
You can see, but close enough where she can see the headstones.
Okay. So across both the lanes and all the highway.
Yeah.
Can I interject? one?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
The first independent building of St. John's Episcopal Church was between this fence and that. So
You
We're
just
gonna
be
show
quiet
it.
now. I can't talk anymore.
All right,
You can't talk
sorry.
anymore. We'll get up here.
We got you.
We got you covered. Ta-da!
Very good.
Okay, next slide.
Well,
So this is a 1935 city engineer's map. This was available in GIS. So what I've done, the red box, I put that in, so that was the original boundary of the cemetery, okay? And then here, okay, gosh, I forgot I have the clicker, so Hart Avenue, which is now 460. This was North Jefferson. So this is the first location in St. John's. That's my church, Richard's church, Allison's church.
Bill, David's,
Well, there's other
Louise.
people. Your church. We served together there. So here's little St. John's right here, 1849. So just to give you, we're going to come back to this map later. Okay, here we go, St. John's, here's my church. Okay, so this is the, that was me. This is the first St. John's, 1849. I know. So they're basically on Orange Avenue, you'll see where it is. And then, so 1849.
And I guess, everybody understands why St. John's was over there, because this was the earliest settlement in the Roanoke area.
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah. So we could talk like 8 hours about this because there's so many layers. So actually, this cemetery in St. John's connects with almost the origins of Roanoke, the evolution of Roanoke, and the whole thing with the salt licks and how I've changed this so many times, but so you have the salt licks and so much going on. So so back then this was the Great Wagon Road that this was located on, and not too far from that. I can't think of the name of that the tavern, but they built the church near the tavern, which shows on another map, which is important, and that shows you the Episcopalian style. They built near a tavern. So, and then here it is in 1936. And these two photos are from the St. John's history book. We have that red book. So, like this one slide, you didn't just get stuck on this with the history, but because originally this was Roanoke County when St. John's was built. And then it becomes the village of Gainsborough, then it becomes Big Lick, then it becomes Old Lick, then it becomes the town of Roanoke, and then it becomes the city of Roanoke. So there's a lot of history here. So St. John's is built, the railroad comes through, they move south to what was then Big Lick, and they sell the church to First Baptist Church, African American, in 1876. So they have it, and then First Baptist Church, they get bigger, so they move into Gainsborough, the church that was there near Henry Street. That was later destroyed by arson, the year before I moved here. And then later, the city of Roanoke owned a portion of it and used it as a free cemetery. Today, the trustees of First Baptist Church own the current 2.23 acre parcel. It's a lot to digest, it's a lot to get into, because you can go all these different tentacles with just this one slide and just this information. Joe, does this ring true with what you?
Yeah, I recently was looking at some historic files of the First Baptist Church Gainsborough, and from what I can tell, their original name was the Big Lick Colored Baptist Church when they bought,
Yes.
or when they
Correct.
bought this.
Yeah, yeah. I just had to really simplify this one little.
Yeah, no, that's.
Because it can go, and like, so Angie found that, so when St. John's bought it, they were in together with two other parishes to use the cemetery.
There was a Presbyterian,
Presbyterian.
the cemetery, and another Baptist.
Yeah, so there's a lot, I mean, we could spend just a lot of time just on this alone. So I just, it's just really fascinating. Just this one little parcel, there's so much history.
Well, it's interesting to think it was the burying ground for so many different groups in Roanoke.
Yeah, you can feel free to ask questions or comment as we go along as well. Okay, Okay, just a little technical stuff here, but just, we're moving into the 1930s, just, you know, as you see here. So here, 1936, this is some ruins, everybody's gone, they've been gone for 30-some years, so I think the whole cemetery is basically becoming vacant in the 1930s.
Wait, so 3 different congregations use this building at the same time?
I think
No,
just.
no,
Oh,
just
it's-
had cemeteries.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
They're all.
We're not real sure where the other churches themselves were located,
Okay, but they all shared the burial ground and that?
or had adjacent,
Oh.
Angie said, right, they had adjacent
I see.
parcels that were all different cemeteries.
Mhm.
Because you have to think 1849, this is still very agricultural, you know.
Right, but I
Frontier.
was just thinking that was the only, I guess that was the first big cemetery in Roanoke, but I guess they're all associated with different churches, so not necessarily.
Well, what I've read, so when the First Baptist Gainsborough, when they come in, I understand that that's the oldest and the first African-American cemetery. That's what I've read. I took it out of here because I can't prove that, but this would be the oldest African-American cemetery.
I was just wondering if that was all of it, because you said that was the first Roanoke grew to north of downtown. I was wondering if you said that, I mean, that was the way that it grew before it was, I guess, before downtown even
Yeah.
existed.
Yeah.
After those Gainsborough is developing north of where, I guess, the railroad tracks are now.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you gotta
All
think,
the founders of Roanoke and everything. So not necessarily just the colored cemetery, but it was for the
Yeah,
cemetery for the whole city, right?
Because it starts here on the Great Wagon Road,
Mhm.
and then you have the Carolina Road, and then you have the Salt Lake, so that's where Roanoke began.
yeah, kind of settlement happened.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And then they move south when the railroad comes in.
Mhm.
And so everybody moves south, so they just abandoned the cemetery. So in the 1930s, so there's a newspaper article, Roanoke Times, mentions an ordinance to close the Old Lake Cemetery, colored graveyard, and that bodies in some instances were buried 4 deep, and that in numerous instances, graves had been excavated for other burials. In 1936, the Works Progress Administration of Virginia, WPA, surveyed the cemetery and reported that for many years it was a public graveyard. Most of the white people have been removed to other cemeteries. It's now used as a colored burying ground. And even now, the bodies of many of the colored people are being removed by the city. It looks today like no man's land, no care is taken of whatsoever. This is 1936.
This is about 25 years before 581 even comes through.
Where were they being removed to?
Well,
I
people
found
knew,
out.
somebody knew the name of another African-American cemetery
Oh,
they were
yeah.
moved to.
I asked that at
Somewhere.
that meeting
Yeah.
in Gainsborough, because his grandfather was buried here at Old Lake. His grandfather was the chauffeur for President Kimball in Norfolk and Western, and he was moved to, there's another African-American cemetery.
Was it Lincoln?
Spring Hill? Spring Hill.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Thank
Spring
you.
Hill.
And then Richard Pike did some work on the St. John's. Do we know where the St. John's people moved to?
I don't know that I know that. no.
Okay.
There's a city cemetery next to Rescue Mission or whatever.
Right.
Could be that some people will move there, but I don't have documentation on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our big outstanding question is where did all the people go?
Well, we know where some of them went.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You haven't gotten to that part.
Yeah, we'll get there. And Jeannie, you've worked out there too, so you know what it feels like. It's sacred. It's a very sacred space out there for the people that still remain. That are still there. Okay, so then I'm just moving a little bit. I must show a look of this, but I love this map that you let me through the Gainsborough History Project. So this is mostly about Gainsborough, but this is a good history map since you guys are so interested. So here's 460, which was the Great Wagon Road, and then here's where 581 comes in, and here's the Carolina Road. Here, and see the Big Lick, that's what by, it's a big Salt Lick. And so, this was, these are 2 Native American trails. If you because of the animals that came to this ark, and so this is where we first settled. Let's show you just a blow up. So here we are up here with the cemetery. This is a 1919 Sanborn map that Jordan Bell then later where the interstate came through. So here you have the historical Gainsborough, Main Street down here's, yeah, okay. And then, so here's a blow-up. So here's the cemetery on the 1919 Sanborn map. Here's our church. And these are two dwellings which E.B. Sloan thinks these became part of the City of Roanoke School Board, school property. So here you can see 581 and the on-ramp, here's our cemetery. So even when they realigned 460, which here's the old Lynchburg Road, so they put it up here, but see, they made it much bigger, so we also lost a swath of the cemetery through here on this bottom southern border. So I just thought this was a good visual, which you wouldn't normally see someplace else, besides the history lecture. Okay, so then here's that same 1935 map. So I've zoomed in to show, okay, so here, this is the current location, the red is the current location of the cemetery. Here's where we park over here, we come up this hill, and we're working on them here. So here's where 581 came through. There's our little church. So now this width here, this 350 feet. This is the north and southbound lanes and the on-ramp. And you still have the other off and on-ramp over here. That's off the map. But this is the on-ramp about right here. So this section here, according to this map, this was the section owned by First Baptist. This was the section owned by the city. And then this section was the county school board, or the city school district, right here. So we're thinking like this, so when the city, this is where we're all a little blurry, but at some point the city owned these parcels and used this as a free cemetery, mostly for poor people, indigent people. And that's where in 1935 the WPA says it was a public cemetery.
And I guess David Tucker was mentioning to me earlier that there's not a real organization to the burials there. So, you know, it wasn't like there was somebody overseeing this and laying out the plots and things. People might just come and put somebody right there.
Yeah, and many of the burials were unidentified, no marker at all. And so you'll see where that comes into play later as well. So here's an aerial view. So here's our current cemetery. This is the fence line that you saw the photos from. So we park along here and we walk up. So we've clearly most of this and up into here. This is all, it's so pretty now, all through here. So here's, this is me, you know, overlaying it on Google Earth. This is to the best of my ability, where I think this is where the cemetery once was. And this is exactly, this is where the church was. So when you guys are on 581, coming south, so you go right over where our first church was.
What was the dark coloration there in the cemetery?
The trees, so it's all completely wooded. So, you know, that took a while to get like that. So I think it's been abandoned since the 30s. And this was an 1842 farm, and this was a neighborhood. This was Gainsborough, from Gainsborough. Of course, all of this was, but.
Hey, Ann. Has happened like this around the nation.
Yes.
Unfortunately,
Yes.
well, it's not the only place.
Yeah, we have a question, yeah.
I had, this is maybe tangential right next to the cemetery, but you mentioned where you park your cars.
Yeah,
I've noticed there, like on Google Maps, but also by there's old kind of steps and
yeah, the
retaining
Carver,
walls.
those are the Carver
They
apartments.
were,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot to look them up. They were actually some of the early Federal Housing Act apartments that were built with FHA money.
Wow. And so they abutted the cemetery then?
yes, and you'll see them in some, I have some early aerial photos. But I still love the Carver apartments. I could go off on a tangent on those alone, so. Yeah,
And I guess I think as we look at this project, of course, we're concerned about what happened in Roanoke, but this was happening all over the country.
yes.
You visit other cities and it's the same situation where certain neighborhoods were just plowed through by these interstates.
Yeah, there's a recent story on 60 Minutes about a cemetery down in Florida that they're doing a lot of research on right now, in the same story.
Yeah, yeah.
So, speaking of the devil, so how did we get here? How did Urban Renewal happen? How did this happen? So, I want to say, okay. So, two federally approved acts caused Urban Renewal. So, the Federal Housing Act of 1949 and the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. And that's easy for me to remember because that's when I was born in 56. So this all happened when I was born. Okay, so this is a 1956 aerial map. It's from USGS, Earth Explorer. And I'm going to zoom in on the next couple slides as well. But so here we have the cemetery. It is 1956. And here's North Jefferson. And so in that talk we were at a couple weeks ago, the residents of Gainsborough said, this was the dividing line. To the west was northwest, and to the east was northeast from it. So here's mostly the area of Gainsborough that was eliminated. And just as a landmark, you have St. Andrews here, and here's Henry Street down here, and then off the Western Railroad.
Where is the Civic Center on that map?
Yes, so you'll see, that's going to be up in here. We're getting to it.
And can I make a comment too?
Yes, please.
When people use the language Gainsborough, that the location of that is somewhat elusive, and that several parts of Roanoke
Yes.
in that part of the map you're talking about are called Gainsborough. So
Yes.
the northeast Roanoke, I would not call Gainsborough.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the people in that area really, at least Margaret Roberts used to tell me to call it northeast and northwest,
Yeah.
more so than Gainsborough.
The original Gainsborough was north
Was
of
north.
what we call Orange or
Exactly. The
Right.
village, it's a village of Gainsborough with a different spelling and everything. Yeah.
yeah, and
That's a good point.
now what we call Gainsborough
Is
is
more-
kind of around St. Andrew's Church,
Yeah.
so down there.
Here.
So we use that term kind of loosely to
Yeah.
talk about that part of town.
Yeah. So probably it's safer to say northeast and northwest,
Yeah.
because that is true. And I don't want to get in trouble. So I'm doing my best. Okay, so just a little detail, Federal Housing Act of 1945. That's basically urban renewal. Basically came in, so all federal money that came in, just, displaced millions of people across the country. Okay, so this is federal money across the country, not just Roanoke, not just the South, everywhere. So, it's federal money to basically they raise the homes. They often do not pay the people for the land or the eminent domain. And so this was taken from this article, but basically saying, that it targeted clearing the slums, so poor people and people of color were often more impacted. And also, we talked about that on that Wednesday, because then that section of Northeast was redlined, which made it difficult to develop and.
Wait, I thought part of eminent domain was paying market rate for the land you took. You can just take it without any
Yeah, they were
compensation?
saying that many people were compensated.
Well, or we're well under
That's,
compensated.
that's another side too.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's another side.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think if you, that 1919 Sanborn map that she showed earlier, if you look at the Sanborn maps, I mean, there's places like around where the Coca-Cola plant is that literally have, I mean, it just says it in words across, scrawled across it. They call them shanties. And, you know, there were a lot of homes that didn't have indoor plumbing, that were not up to code or standards. But then again, you gotta remember what Ann was saying, that they were also redlined, so they couldn't get loans to help make improvements to those houses. And on paper, it looks like you're replacing shanties with nice housing projects, if you're just looking at it on paper. But what we missed was the fact that these were communities of people that cared for each other, that had invested their lives in these homes, and they were their lives and their communities and their connections to each other. So on paper it looked like it was, you know, renewal, but in real life it wasn't.
Can I make one more comment
Yeah.
on that? I think there are technical terms, one of which is blight.
Yes.
And
Okay, right.
when
Yes.
a city jurisdiction declares some area blighted, then they can condemn the property and give them pennies on the dollar.
Oh, right.
That's what
So
happened
that's
here.
part of what happened.
And blight removal is still used today. I mean, in different ways, but it's still a term that is used. Some of the South Jefferson redevelopment part was considered clearing slums and blight, you know, with the money. So it's still used in different ways.
David has.
It also became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you took a neighborhood and you identified it as your next. And if you owned a piece of property there, you had no incentive to fix the roof. You had no incentive to do anything because you couldn't get your money back. And so I think what happened, another thing that happened 5, maybe even 10 years prior to taking that property over, that area was identified. So if you were in that area, you sat there and you couldn't sell it because nobody wanted to buy a piece of property that was going to be condemned.
And you're not going to put money into it.
And you're not going to put
Somebody
money
take
in
it away
it.
from you.
So
Yeah.
it became a self-fulfilling
Yeah.
prophecy.
We're in the process right now trying to hunt down the redevelopment plan for this area
You know,
to be able to really understand exactly what were the boundaries of the redevelopment plan.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there were what they called shanties that were redlined or torn down. But also, there were people who were of very large means. There were, you know, there were bankers that lived there in that community. There were companies that were feeding the economy of those neighborhoods. And so not only were you getting rid of what somebody else might call a shanty, but you were removing the economic ability for anybody that was self-involved to be able to do anything.
Yeah. And I should have said, it was just that one part of the map that
Right,
referred to it,
that's what
but
made
you're
it-
right, there's some in fact, she's got a picture later on that shows one of the houses, or a couple of the houses that were there. And you're right, they were not all even substandard on paper. They were.
Yes, ma'am.
I moved back to Southwest Virginia several years ago, and I'd like this confirmed. Someone told me that at one point, the city of Roanoke put the city in quadrants, and that African Americans could only live in the Northwest. Is that true?
Yes, I mean, there were some maps that, I'm trying to remember, what were they called? There's a paper on it, but there were certain blocks, and there was a law, I think it was in 1917, that basically said, and it went both ways. It said that a person of color could not sell their property to someone of a different color, and a white person also could not sell their property to somebody of a different color in these certain areas that were designated, which is where you get that term kind of red line.
Yeah.
And And there are maps that somebody found, he was doing research, found them in the city's records that show specific areas that were redlined or designated. I think they were called segregation districts. And like we recently did some work on expanding the Old Southwest Historic District, and I know that, say from maybe 5th Street to 12th Street in like Roar, Salem, Norfolk, that area on the south side of the railroad tracks, that was one of those areas I remember seeing. Anyway, so yes, and that existed again in a lot of cities. And you also had a lot of deed restrictions. The development companies, whether it was the Raleigh Port Development Company or South Roanoke or Melrose Rugby, any of those, there was a real reaction after World War I with a lot of immigrants coming over after World War I, and there was a reaction to that, and there were a lot of deed restrictions that were put in place. And they would say, they would list the people of certain descents that were not, that you couldn't sell the land to. And a lot of times they were like for 30 years or 35 years. So those deed restrictions obviously have all expired in Roanoke. But it doesn't, expired or not, they set a pattern that's kind of hard to reverse after that long. There's always a story, the stone house that Black Dog Salvage owns right across Memorial Bridge. I don't know if y'all all heard the story that was, I think, was he Italian?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a stonemason. And they wouldn't let him build across the bridge in the Ghent neighborhood. And so he thought he would kind of, thumb his nose at him and build a very fine house right outside. And I don't know if y'all remember Elaine Powers, who used to be the librarian at the Virginia Ring. I think it was her mother did an oral history with that person, and that's where I heard about it from. Anyway, so that's an example of that deed restrictions that kept certain ethnicities, ethnic groups out of certain neighborhoods.
So during that, I don't know quite how the pieces fit together, but there's a system called segregation. And that restricts black people to living in certain places. And so in Roanoke, black people could come across the railroad to work in what is now white Roanoke, the south of the railroad. But then they'd have to go back across the railroad, across what we call the Martin Luther King Bridge, like that, at night, back over to Henry Street and all that kind of area. So in the black community, you would have people of some means or wealth. The most well-known one in our local circles is the Clater Mansion. Jordan Bell talks a lot about all that. But you would also have people who did not have very many means, but they did own their own places and all that. And that's part of what made the community so fascinating and so rich, was you had all these different people who, on their best days, I'll say, or whatever, who looked out for each other and kind of cared for one another. And that is what was destroyed through this urban renewal and highway construction system.
So is that what destroyed Henry Street?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was a redevelopment area where buildings were taken through eminent domain.
And this panel that Ann and I went to, I mean, they took pride in keeping their yards and houses looking good. Henry Street was, they would have, revivals where they would make tons of food, and you didn't pay for it, they gave it to you. And she even, this woman even said that even the police that were there to watch over things enjoyed it. I mean, we just, and I know this happened everywhere, but we just uprooted and ruined people's lives. And she even expressed that there were people that literally that died of a broken heart. Because of that.
Well, but also talking about that community, one thing that fascinated me when I wrote the National Register nomination for Gainsborough a long time ago, and I can't remember the exact number, but there were probably close to 10 women's garden clubs that were part of that community. So that, I know a garden club doesn't necessarily sound, but just the idea that that's the level of of communal life that they had. Anyway, so.
I would like to say something.
Yes, ma'am.
I grew up in this neighborhood in northeast area. And exactly what you're saying, that's what, I was born in 1949, and I lived this experience. So there were doctors, lawyers, there were dentists, all African Americans pretty much had to live in the same neighborhood. They were not allowed, or we were not allowed to live in other parts of the city. And therefore, if you wanted to live in the city, you had to live in these areas. And my parents, my grandparents had a wonderful, beautiful home, and my father, through the GI Bill, was given the opportunity to build his home, which was a 2-bedroom home, brick, not brick, but cement. And my grandfather gave my mother and father a lot to build their home. So there were shanties, yes, but there were nice homes where people took care of them.
Yep.
And
Say that
therefore,
the word shanty is a white term.
Well, and I did not mean in any
Right.
way to say like that. I was always surprised to see it actually written on the maps on this one certain area. And I do think that that was specifically around where the Coca-Cola plant is, because it used to be the central manufacturing, if y'all can remember that cute little building that used to sit right underneath the 2nd Street Bridge. But that was a lumberyard area, and I think there were probably a lot of workers housing right around there. But just on that Sanborn map, they're just these tiny little squares, and then there's no addresses for them or anything, and then it's just scrawled in letters all the way across them, and it says that word shanty, which are shanties, specific to that area. But that's only a block or two away from the 400 block of Gilmer, where some of the nicest houses and the most distinguished, leaders and citizens of Roanoke, of the African American community in Roanoke, lived. So, like you said, it was all mixed in there together, which, we all know that diversity is a good thing, not just in racial diversity, but socioeconomic diversity. We have a community of all sorts of people living together and helping each other.
So this slide is from Mary Bishop's article she wrote in 1977, 87. They mentioned it at the meeting, block by block, street by street. So this shows, the level. These were good houses. Many types of houses like this still exist, but. So I'm just adding the visual content to that meeting we had 2 weeks ago. So just maps and graphics here. So we're zooming in a little bit more to 1956, still in 1956. So you have, there's Williamson Road. This is a pretty historic town, 1842 Boothman's Farm, Orange Avenue. So just kind of, giving you a visual zooming in. So it's a little bit before 581 comes in. And then here's 1960 era map. So progress is coming. And so here's the records for Booker T. Washington, and then here's starting to come through here, and then see. So here in Northeast, that they've removed many of these houses already. So this is where the Civic Center is going in, and you can already see 460 is being expanded in 1960. So here's 1968. Urban Renewal, so it's already happened. So this is what it looks like. So 1,600 homes, 200 businesses, and 24 black churches were taken. There's a little cemetery kind of in the middle of it all, and the interchange here. There's Little Williamson Road. So this is the future Civic Center site, which comes in 1971. Here's the Ford dealership and the future federal post office site. Yeah, it's hard to put, any words with this, because there you go. So I blew up these two slides side by side. This is almost one of my favorite slides, and this I could do a whole story on this. I think this needs to be a Netflix show. So owners were offered an average of $3,000 for their homes, when the average cost was $7,000, and also no financing was provided. So it really, in order to, you know, I'm not going to pay it off. And what if they said, you know, we're taking your home and you can't get financing for another one? It's like, that would just be, I don't know, extremely difficult. I've never felt those feelings before. But here, so down here, so we have these 3 houses here and this house here. These people refuse to sell. And I wanted to do a show on Kathleen Ross. I want to find out more about her. She was the last person to sell, and she sold her house in 1981.
Wasn't she 90 at the time, I think?
I want to find out more about her.
Yeah.
That's a hero.
Do you know if the tree that's in her yard is?
Yeah, that's what they say. So here we are today. So this is a current Google Earth view. So the access roads into the Civic Center are based on these houses that refuse to sell. And this is the access road I use a lot of times. I come up from here, and the houses were right there.
We should name those roads after these people.
Yeah. Some of those access roads are right there.
Miss Ross was, she was the secretary at Gilmer School. Gilmer School was sitting right there where.
Where was that? Was it down here?
It was right, it was right behind the post office that's there now.
Okay.
It's sat right up on top of the hill
Where the new Gabriel one is?
Not the very new one, but
Oh, okay.
the original number one that's there now. The one that they built up.
Yeah, I found a photo of the Gilmer.
And that was, if I remember correctly, the oldest elementary school in Roanoke, and they tore it down. So that was the school I went to when I was growing.
Such a history.
And you mentioned up on a hill, that's one thing that other people have told me is the topography has changed.
Yeah,
Everything
right.
flattened so much.
Yeah, that's what they
And
said.
there were a lot more hills.
Yes,
But they
there
leveled
were.
it. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Was there public outcry against what was happening? Were there groups that were upset? I mean, certainly in the area.
Not enough.
Not enough.
No, and also think like this was federally approved and the whole country was doing this, and at the time the civic leaders thought it was a really good idea.
And they were building federal housing, it sounded like a good story. We're giving them these new homes
Yeah.
in these federally built housing projects. But, you know, again, they forgot about the community, the part that was so important. So I think that for people that didn't live there, they didn't understand or recognize. Yeah.
If I may, I think the correct term would be the white civic leaders approved that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's important to keep that perspective.
The white civic leaders, which they're probably all
Right.
white at that.
Yeah, they definitely. I mean, the people
But that's a good point.
all up and down from, you know, the federal government all the way down were the decision makers.
So one
Yeah,
of
and this
the-
was before you had urban planners, so I think, always think an urban planner. There was no urban planners involved, it was just city highway engineers.
One of the reasons I understand some of this is going on is the local business association or business leaders or whatever are wanting to improve the approach to downtown.
Yes.
So that
Well-
people can come off of 81.
They had to get them to downtown, and this was the shortest, quickest way to do it. And that's how the city engineers, that's how they work, the highway engineers get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
That's why the development of 581 stopped right at Elm, I guess.
It did, it did.
That's funny.
You just had to get them downtown.
Yeah, and so they didn't like the looks. I mean, I don't know how to talk about all that exactly, but, so we'll send this through the black neighborhood, the black community. And then you bring it, then there's the urban renewal, which is leveling that. They don't like the looks of that, so it's all, can be seen kind of from this capitalistic point of view, I guess you'd say. Racist?
Very. No doubt about it. Stephen?
One piece of that architecture too was the Hunter Viaduct, which has been removed to make way
Yes.
for First Union Tower.
Yeah.
And that drew people straight into downtown
Yeah.
commerce as well.
Well, but it is, I do want to ask the question, I mean, this is something to go and try to research. As people have mentioned, there were black leaders in the community who were, you know, leaders of their community and respected. Bankers, doctors, and did they try to speak, you know, to the white city council at all? I don't know. It would be, that's something that we ought to look into to find out, you know, who did speak up against it, and we can imagine how they were treated, but, you know, I just have to put this against the same, what were the years that there was that interracial integration committee that, at the historical side, there was a talk of probably 10 years ago. Louise, it was when you and I would make those lunches over. Do you remember? Anyway, and there was a pastor who was part of that committee who talked about how they had a budget to go and slowly kind of eat in white restaurants and things and kind of slowly integrate. And I don't know the time frame of that, but it's interesting to think if that's going on one side of things and this is going on at the same time.
That would have been about 1968.
That's what I was thinking, okay.
My dad was on that.
Oh, okay, okay. So that was kind of after this, okay.
Mr. Cobb, Councilman Cobb?
I think it's Reverend Wilkinson that you're talking about.
Yes, that's right.
Who we just renamed a section of Carver Avenue from Lucy Addison over to 581 in his honor or memory.
Oh, good.
I would have to go back and look at some of the articles that I found, but it was interesting. There seemed to have been some division among some African-American leaders, some who favored the progress and some who didn't.
Interesting.
Now, I'm not saying that was a majority, but there seemed to be some division, and I'd like to find out more about that.
Which I think we've got to keep in mind, any community has division in it.
Right.
I mean, even if it were a decision, something within just the white community, there would probably be different perspectives on it.
I think that's true. I think because there were also promises made to people in these communities that weren't kept. And I know most definitely there was a lot of pushback against it. I think her name is Claudia Whitworth, who published the Tribune. And they're kind of approaching the Tribune on all sides, whatever, along Henry Street in that area. And the Tribune, it was the main depository for black people's history. I don't know whether through all Virginia, but southwestern Virginia for 50 years, some kind of thing. I think she's woken up in the middle of the night one night and bulldozers have come and bulldozed the Tribune building and destroyed all those records.
After the city had promised her they would let her know, and all of a sudden it was all gone.
But there's a lot of stuff like that that goes on, or went on, the players sued the city and tried to stop a number of things that they did around that piece of property, which is opposite the Gainsborough Library. And they got a little traction, but not very much, and the city kind of condemned it or parts of it, and so they couldn't do anything with it or use it. So they're kind of bankrupted by way of, all these shenanigans or maneuvers or whatever on the part of the city leadership, I guess, who had designs on these properties. So there's definitely pushback. But when promises are made and people, well, I don't have a indoor plumbing in my house. So they're promising me a new house with indoor plumbing. And I can go live with my friends over in that part. Well, they don't give them any money for their house.
I'm
And they
about
can't
to reach
afford
the conclusion. It's a little past time,
Go
so
for it.
I still have a little bit more
Sorry. Like we said, there's a lot of layers and a lot of tangents to this, and this is a work in progress.
Yeah, so this slide here too, just Pointer Springs alone is another
Story.
talk. So, trying to make this short, but this has been fascinating. Angie found this information for, so in 1938, the city of Roanoke bought 123 acres, 6 miles west of Old Lake, off US 460 in Bartow County. And we understand that it was to be used for a sanatorium.
The sanatorium, and then yes, they moved over to juvenile detention.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in the behind it is the cemetery.
Yeah, so, think I have this right, so then in 1959, it became a cemetery for the poor and the indigent, so that's where the bodies end up going. So so they have this property, so they think, well, we gotta move all these bodies, where are we gonna put them? So let's put them out here. So,
The bodies that are under 580, what is 581 now?
right,
Yeah.
correct. So this is the little marker, this is the cemetery, so the next slide, so here's just a little bit more detail of the marker. And then, so this is the short version, but, so 1961, 933 bodies from the Old Lake River Episcopal Cemetery were interned here. Of the 933 bodies, only 28 could be identified from existing markers. That's why there were so many unidentified, because there was no markers for them. And all were placed in individual boxes and placed in a mass grave with this accompanying marker.
Are the names on the back of this?
And
Well, they had 28 that they identified.
Right, yeah.
but the interesting thing is there's a lot of just markers lying around in Old Lake Cemetery today.
Right.
So, I don't know why I think there's more than 28 markers, David, somebody that's more familiar, that are lying around,
Oh,
that have
yeah.
been kind of separated from their,
They probably just didn't want to deal with it.
yeah. We don't know. And the other thing that we're still working on is, I think it's the death records that are in the Virginia room list 1,433 people that were buried in Old Lake Cemetery in the sections that were removed. Is that right? But we only have 933 here, so we don't know where the other 400 or 500 are.
I think some of those came from City Farm as well.
Yes.
But in the Virginia room, they distinguish between City Farm and Old Lick Cemetery. So these, the number of 13 or 1,433 are specific to Old Lick Cemetery. But this monument only says 933.
Well,
Those,
one of the previous slides said some of the people were buried at 4 deep. I guess with that account, the 933 were accounting for, I guess, the different set of different levels.
Might have been, and also, there were some references earlier that they were already moving bodies, so maybe some had been moved earlier, and this only represents, the 933 might just represent who were moved in, 1959 to 61, or, for the 581. But these are some of the questions we still have that we're trying to sort out.
Okay, so just moving on to the conclusion. So we started with 2 federal laws that allow this, and we're ending with 2 federal laws that will prohibit it from ever happening again. So these are federal laws when it involves federal money. So Urban Renewal led to the creation of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And that is how Alice and I have made our money. That law right there. So it's like the law of the land involving any sort of federal money. So all federal agencies are obligated to, with respect to the preservation and stewardship of historic properties throughout the country. So this is a little view of the cemetery. Now this is, I think, from last year. Right? So I think more of this is
So
clear.
this shows you how much they cleared, at
Yeah.
least
Wow.
as of last year, and even more.
That's a lot better.
So this is
the right half,
1966, so this was, so this is, so 1966, and then more recently, we have in 1994, so President Clinton has signed into law the executive order, and I use this at work. to work for the federal government, and this is law with every project I have. So the short version is called environmental justice law. So it's an executive order signed by the president. It's, you know, to protect minority populations and low-income populations. So, so basically, like, only involving federal money. So, like, this could never happen again because, you know, it's a low-income minority population in Northeast, so they have to put the road someplace else. And it also, just with the federal government, with FEMA, so just for instance, if, you know, for all the rescue recovery that we do, like, we have to have these recovery centers, but we have to place them near where people can get to them. You know, we can't just put them a mile away and say, well, come to us, we have to come to them. So environmental justice is one we use all the time in the federal government. So it's very important. So most of anything federally funded projects are protected. So I don't think this could ever happen again. That's just my opinion.
The highway.
Yeah.
The highway couldn't.
The highway couldn't happen.
And you run into this with anything that's federally licensed, permitted, or funded. So it can be cell towers have to go through this, road widenings, the Army Corps of Engineers, flood reduction projects, all of those have to take these into account.
And then there's two more, this is the last, okay, so basically, so here's a second to last slide, I promise, okay? So this is so important, okay, this is where we began, this is where we're ending. This is what I love. So 2019, the Friends of Old Lake Cemetery was created. Ellen Stick was the creator, and along with First Baptist Church Gainsboro are reclaiming the cemetery. We plan to identify those still buried there and those reinterred at Corner Springs. So these are just some fun photos of the volunteers here. But see, this is all the brush we're clearing out. Mostly Richard. Richard, you're there like every So all this gets cleared out, and then we have to haul it all the way down the hill and down to Carver Street to be picked up. So one thing is cutting it, the other thing is cleaning it.
The city is picking up all the brush for us and hauling it away.
Yeah.
Just want to let you know.
It's a great place to be. We enjoy being on this completing site. So how can you help? Or the resources for the Gainsborough History Project, here's the website, and then Friends of Old Lake Cemetery, clean up the first Saturday of each month, which is this Saturday. And the next one is May 7th. And these are the kids from the Episcopal Diocese Wedding Convention. We haul all these kids out. So if kids can do it, we can do it.
And I would say ultimately, the dream is to have an ADA accessible parking area and kind of a little contemplative garden area where we would have the interpretive sign that we're working on, just to give people a place to be able to come and honor the people that were buried there. And I guess we should add, I mean, it's our understanding that it's been somewhat painful for First Baptist Church. Many people there, weren't you even saying that on March 15th there, somebody said they didn't know where their grandmother was now? You know, for the people of First Baptist Gainsboro who most recently had used this cemetery and felt most directly impacted by the removal of the graves, it's a wound because it is very painful for them. Can you imagine thinking that your ancestors were buried somewhere and then they're just kind of unceremoniously removed and you don't necessarily know where they are? I mean, they might be at Corner Springs, but again, you don't have a place to go to other than a mass grave that doesn't even list their names anywhere. So.
Yes.
Is there anybody here, if you go to find a grave, you'll find that there's about 750 graves identified, tied back to death, a lot of them tied back to death rates. And I checked a couple of them, and they're actually at Old Lick rather than Corner Springs. Is there anybody here that was involved in putting those graves up? I mean, somebody did a lot of research.
Renee Worthen, who works in Botetourt County, she's primarily responsible for doing a lot of that research and entering those on Find a Grave.
Yeah.
She worked with another woman
Okay,
to do
all
that.
right. So, you know, it'd be interesting, just by cursory look, it looks like most of them are still in old wood. But, you know, I don't know that, you know, they were tied back to death certificates and stuff like that.
When the city had done the records in the Virginia room, they had separated the ones that had been buried in Old Lick and the ones that were First Baptist Church. So if you were to look at the original death certificates back in 1930 and prior, there is a separation as to which ones would still be in this cemetery now and which ones would be on the plots that were moved, in theory. I mean, that's theoretical. I actually haven't walked around and verified it. Another day.
I have a question, going back to the first church that you talked about, and the dates on that again were
1849 for St. John's.
So was the cemetery, and that was a white church, were the graves for the first part of the gravesite's history white?
Yes.
Members of that church,
Yes.
typically church
And
graveyard,
many of those were removed
and they were removed
by their
when?
families.
At what time period? As they sold the land to the black church, or much later in this
I
century?
think it was later.
Richard, didn't you say it was in the 30s?
I think what happens here is the country, Virginia, start passing segregation laws which prohibit any commingling between races.
Okay,
I guess that's a way to put it.
so that's a whole nother topic
In the
of
cemetery.
interest, yeah.
So
So-
when that happens then, and the white Roanoke is moved south,
Yeah.
they're uneasy leaving their dead at that church. They move south further, but people have been in the graves.
Do we
So
know
they're
where?
moving them
Okay.
over that period of time. Where they move them to, I don't know that.
Okay. And then that land was then reused for black internments, I would imagine, right? So we know that the issue is not a white and black story so much of the reinterment over Corner Springs. It really is a black internment and reinterment issue. Yeah. So it's a very complicated story.
It is.
And I wish everyone today had been at our lecture last month where we talked about urban renewal for the whole night. And it was just, it was a really good presentation by Councilman Whitehead, and we missed you, but I'm getting the sense from just tonight that there's a lot more to discuss in topics and forums such as this. And we want to thank you so much for coming here. And